while we're getting set up and during the debate, we're going to have, Stephen's going to pass around a sign-up sheet for our emails and other materials we send out. If you haven't signed up with us and you're not getting those emails, please do so that we can keep you informed about what we're doing. If at any time you can't hear, raise your hand. Okay, you can't hear? That's better? Okay. Okay. So the first part of our debate is going to be 2 minutes where each candidate describes himself. Okay, everybody's going to quiet down. The first 2 minutes allocated to each candidate is for them to describe who they are, why they're running. And then after that, we're going to have a debate in a little different format than we've had public debates before. It's really going to be a discussion. We did something like this on the GGG Insights program on LTV for the last election cycle. And my job is very limited. I sort of just throw out a topic or a question, and then the two Davids have a discussion between themselves about the issue. One person's going to start, and then at some point, relatively soon, the other one breaks in, sort of like the discussion you may have at your kitchen table with somebody you like, rather than somebody you don't like. So it's hopefully very civil, but also very substantive. So you really can't get too far with sound bites. And those discussions are going to go up to about 10 to 12 minutes. Lauren Schwartz is sitting right over there. For the first part, where each person gets 2 minutes, she's going to raise her hand when you've got about 15 seconds to go, and then she's going to wave her hand when you really should stop. And then, or this. And then also, during the discussion of substantive issues, and this is not going to be that formal, if we're going about 10 or 12 minutes, she's going to start raising her hand so we wind up and go to something else. So I guess we'll do it alphabetically or by age. Either way, David.
You're in charge.
You just won.
David will start.
David will start. Yeah. Okay. David. Yes, you.
Oh, okay.
David the elder.
Okay. Thank you, Arthur. And thank you to everyone here for coming and taking some of your beautiful summer evening to participate in the civic event. Can't hear? Okay, Arthur.
You have to get closer to your...
Do we have a mic we want to use?
Well, let's see if this one works.
I'm happy to stand up if that will make things easier. Okay. What? Okay, I'm going to do this without the mic. I'll start over. My name is David Gruber. I live in the Hardscrabble section at the corner of Northwest Harbor. I first had a home here in 1987, and I moved here year-round in 1991. I have 2 daughters, now aged 21 and 18. I adopted both of them as a single father. They were born in China and abandoned as infants, and I adopted each of them when they were a year old. And they're now lovely young women, and I'm very proud of them. I was the candidate of the Democratic Party for supervisor in 2001, came within 185 votes of unseating Jay Schneiderman, who was a renegade Democrat who bolted the party to defeat Kathy Lester. And I then became chair of the Democratic Committee. And I was chair from 2002 to 2004 when we recovered the majority. And in the 2003 campaign, I was also the campaign chair. Subsequently, I participated in every campaign committee from 2003 through 2015, but more behind the scenes. I have literally, without exaggeration, written myself almost all of the campaign literature of the East Hampton Democratic Party and crafted its campaign strategy in the campaigns of 2003 through 2015. After the 2015 election, when the current board majority was already 2 years old, I began to have concerns about what was going on in East Hampton. If I say that I understand what promises we as Democrats have made for the last 20 years, it's because I made them. I wrote them. And after 2015, I became very, very concerned that we were not really achieving the sort of things that we had promised the community for affordable housing, for water quality, for airport noise, for a response to coastal erosion, for transparency in government. And it's one of the reasons why I did not then sit on the 2017 committee. When I wrote these things down, I wrote them because I believed them. And by 2017, I was no longer convinced that the Democrats were able and willing to do what we've been telling the community all these years. I do not believe it's because the majority of 3 that sat on the board now and been the majority for 5 years doesn't want to do these things. I think they do. So then I asked myself, well then, why are we stuck? Why are we making so little progress? And the only answer I can give is they don't know how. Although they would like to accomplish these things for the community, they're not happening. And that's why I've decided to run for a seat on the town board. Thank you.
Well, David?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Group for Good Government. I also want to thank the East Hampton Village and the Emergency Services Building for having us. And I really want to thank everyone in the room just for being here right now. This is what community does. We come out to support our elected officials, to hear what their concerns are, what they can do for us as a residents in a community. So I applaud you for taking your time out tonight to coming here. My name is David Lease. I'm the Democratic Town Councilman, and I'm looking to retain my seat in this election, September 13th in the primary and the November 6th general election. I'm the only candidate that is actually endorsed by the East Hampton Town Democratic Committee. At a prime age of 42, I am proud to call East Hampton my hometown and my birthplace. I grew up on Newtown Lane to a 29-year tenured school teacher of the East Hampton Union Free School District. I'm the son of an immigrant father that escaped tyranny and depression from Indonesia, came here to seek a better life for his family and provide so. And he did a pretty darn good job in my belief. My wife Rachel and I make Springs our home now. We've been there for about 15 years. There we have 4 lovely children, 4 lovely girls. Brighton, who is 11, Brinley is 9, Bree, who is 6, and Brooke, who is 16 months. They all have attended the Montauk Child Daycare Center, the Eleanor Whitmore Daycare Center, and my 3 oldest right now still attend the Springs School. My youngest is in diapers and probably crawling at home. We are the definition of a young, hard-working family. And it is my children, it is for my children, and for their generation that I have stepped up to accept the appointment for town council back in this past January, and it's for my desire to retain my seat for town council, to make changes and forward insight into my hometown that would be appropriate for them to succeed. I have a deep desire to maintain the values and traditions that make East Hampton so unique. There's my lovely wife. Thank you. Excuse me. She has my heart there. I also have the aspiration to continue to keep East Hampton a leader in strict environmental principles, planning foresight, and also economic development. I have been a founding board member of Citizens for Access Rights to protect public beach access. I'm a 5-year member of the Zoning Board of Appeals of the town of East Hampton. I see fellow members here. Thank you for coming. I was also a founding member of Pathways for Humanity, and I chaired the Amagansett restoration of the Amagansett Life-Saving Station, which is just recently placed on the National Historical Register. Some have tried to create a false narrative that I'm an opportunist and not a true Democrat. My answer is that I am not a lifelong politician like others. I'm a lifelong resident of East Hampton and an expert in everything East Hampton, from Town Line Road to 2000 Montauk Highway, which is the Montauk Point Lighthouse. I just became a newly registered Democrat. Just because that doesn't mean I haven't believed in democratic values my entire life. When I was young and impressionistic, I listened to my father, like all young men should do. My father told me to check that box with an R on it, and I did so, not knowing what the intentions would be. I recently decided to change my vote, change my status. I've never acted on any political agenda. I've never gone to any political function. I do everything for the town of East Hampton, even though numerous people from both parties have always asked me to run. I never have done anything. I align myself with the Democratic Committee, their values, and I move forward in this election doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. David Lease, since we had David Gruber go first on the introductions, I'm going to ask you to go first on our first question, which is question J in your program's functioning government. And the question is, and I'll just read it along with you, can the town with a budget of over $77 million, hundreds of employees, and facing complex long-term challenges continue to have a 5-person town board, which is both the chief executive officer and the legislative body, and is changing every 2 years?
Okay,
Yeah.
stay seated. Thank you, Arthur. There is always room for improvement in town government. And that's what I hope to also bring to this town government as I move forward this year, and hopefully if you elect me for next year then too. We actually have a town government right now that has a 5-member board with 1 supervisor. We have over close to 300 employees. As Arthur said, a $77 million budget right now. And we actually encompass one of the largest towns on the east end of Long Island right now. I think one of the things we have to look at right now is that the town board should be here to craft policy and legislate and interact with the residents. What happens right now, if that government becomes too big, we as town board members aren't allowed to do so. We need to be able to see our constituents through the CACs to move forward to make the right decisions on there. I do think that the town government and the town board still needs help in doing so. We have a lot of capital plans out there right now, potentially moving forward in the next couple of years, and some very large projects. I think it would be appropriate to look into the options if the supervisor would wish, or the supervisor at the time. I would actually support either crafting a position for either 1 or 2 ways. Either a project manager that would oversee all capital projects, or potentially a town manager also. What those would then allow us to do is to continue on legislating, and with the projects that we had seen to fruition through involvement of all of the community entities, through environmental review, and are moving forward, that they would be able to be worked on. I think I would still be a very hands-on individual on any project, but we need help to make sure that our finances for those projects stay on top of it. I would not necessarily want a project manager or a town manager that would end up going and craft financial legislation for our town or direction. I think we use that and we keep with our finance department for that. But what ends up happening, a lot of times, the town will bond for a lot of money or craft a very large project. That project does not get moving forward. In the end, what happens, money is lost on the pay down of those bonds. And I think a project manager or a town manager will allow us to have better financial stability moving forward and help us in the end. Some of my thoughts.
Oh, by the way, David, just feel free to break in on each other politely.
I appreciate that, Arthur, but
Yeah.
you know, he had something to say, and I don't want to interrupt the thought.
No problem.
I agree with that too.
Let me give you all a concrete example of why the town board should not continue to be directly in a management role in East Hampton. We have a somewhat archaic system in which the executive function of management is combined with the legislative function of the town board. 2 weeks ago, I was at the Springs CAC meeting. The 5 Springs fire commissioners and 2 of the assistant chiefs came to the meeting to say that their emergency communications system is on the brink of collapse. It is obsolete. If it fails, it cannot be repaired. And the assistant chief said, I am up at night worrying about loss of life. That is not an exaggeration. It is what the man said. Now, it turns out that the town has bought new equipment, new communications equipment, but cannot install it on the existing communications towers because they're either too short or too not strong enough, or they're in a deteriorated condition, or they were never appropriate for that type of equipment to begin with. From which I conclude that the town bought the system without first engineering the installation of the system. That seems like a rather obvious thing to do. Now we're stuck. They're saying that it's going to take another 9 months, possibly 12 months to get this system going, and there's no fallback in the event that it fails. That's the kind of thing that any competent manager should be on top of, should be doing. The problem has been understood for more than 5 years, and yet we find ourselves at this very perilous point. So I would, whether the solution is a town manager or something else is in a sense a detail, But I don't think we can continue with the town of this size and complexity, with the town board trying to be both the legislature and the executive management of the town. It is not working.
I agree with David on this sense here too. And I think this example he actually pinpointed is the prime example of it. When we talk about building a building, life and death is not from building a building. Life and death is from emergency services. Emergency services and the communication system in the town of East Hampton right now is on the verge of breaking down. Tonight is actually the East End Fire Commissioners meeting right now. The fire commissioners from the Montauk Fire Department came to the town board meeting a couple weeks ago stating the same thing that you heard from the Springs Fire Commissioners. And the assistant chief that you talked to is one of my best friends in Springs. I talked to him after that meeting also. What ended up happening is that I think the town at that time might have been sold a false bill of sale from some engineers. Engineers might have said your towers can actually take the weight. Well, they're incorrect. The new engineers have now said they're 154% over capacity right now. The fallback plan, if you talk to the fire commissioners or some of the people I've talked to in the Amagansett Fire District, is as close to Morse code as possible. It is actually a dereliction of duties. And I agree with David here, and I think we agree here, that we need a manager to oversee these projects here. And this is one of the more erroneous situations that town can be in. I hope it gets fixed ASAP.
Well, do you have any other ideas about how the town could be operating better on a government basis?
Mike.
Well, we have other problems apart from, I think, lack of professional management. One of them is that the range of problems that East Hampton faces is rather extraordinary for a town this size because of the wealth that's here, because of the huge changes in population in the course of a summer. This is not, as I've sometimes said, a small town in a cornfield in Iowa. It's a unique place. It's unrealistic to expect that any 5 people we elect to the town board could possibly have any background or expertise in the full range of problems that we face. If one of them happened to have some experience or expertise in one of them, that would be a fluke. That would be the hole in one. So the classic response of the town has been to hire experts and hire professionals. I've hired professionals in the course of a long business career, and I can tell you that you not only need to have a good consultant, you have to be a knowledgeable client in order to supervise that professional. And if you're not, you're likely to get nothing useful. So we don't even have a knowledgeable client. What are we going to do about this? The answer to me is that within this community, we have extraordinary human resources. We have people in our town, probably on almost any subject you can imagine, who have important knowledge and experience to bring to bear. We need to invite them into the process. We need to make our own citizens an integral part of the planning process, not having them get up at the end and make little 3-minute speeches in front of the town board. They need to be intimately involved, or we're not going to get where we need to go.
Well, I think what you're saying as far as having the citizens being involved, we do have a number of CACs, another advisory committees that do help us, and the town has had a policy over the last couple of decades now to involve the public when it comes to making decisions so that we can legislate. Talking about having the hole-in-one or the ace up the sleeve is, I actually have completed a large municipal project. The reconstruction of a structure that was put on the National Historical Register that actually went from a derelict building that fundraised over $1.6 million from dereliction to completion using multiple agencies, uniting the community around it. I have completed that actually. I am actually enjoying it. It's something that actually has now become a museum that everyone really enjoys. So I have experience in that. But he is correct. I'm not an experienced in telecommunications. So I think we do have to make sure that we actually function better as a government by asking for the help and assistance in those roles too.
Okay. We're allowed to stop early if that's the problem. And
You don't have to go 12 minutes?
And then go on to the next issue. And the next issue happens to be telecommunications, which you guys already started. David, I guess you go first this time.
Well,
David Gruber.
okay. So there are 2 different aspects to telecommunications. There's, of course, what's called in our town code personal cell phone service. I don't think...
They can't hear us in the back. Sorry, Dave, I just see some hands in the raised in the back.
Okay. Maybe we're going to try a different system.
Is this one better?
I don't know. Is it turned up?
Hello?
Yeah, that's for you. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So we have personal cell phone service that all of us are familiar with. And we also have needs for emergency communications. These are two, I mean, they all use radios, but they're very distinct systems, and we should not get them confused. I think what Arthur wanted to ask about is the personal cell phone service, where we all know it's pretty spotty. Sometimes it's non-existent. I'm going to sound like a broken record before the end of the evening because in response to almost any planning problem, there's a kind of routine that people who are familiar with solving these problems go through. And the first one is to figure out where you are, what is the current state of affairs, and the second one is to figure out what outcome you want. Where do you want to end up at the end of the process? And strangely, that's something that we often don't do in East Hampton. We don't discuss and figure out before we start what's the conclusion that we're looking to achieve here. Then you have to connect those dots. You have to figure out how do you get from A to B. What are the available opportunities, the possible ways that we can go from this point to that point? Which one of them seems to us the best, and are we willing to do anything? Sometimes the right answer is to do nothing. In this case, we need to understand what it would take physically, concretely, to give us the cell phone service that we want, how many towers we would need, where they could possibly be located. We all know that people are not going to be happy, and we have to then make a decision about whether what we want is to find some places to put additional towers that people will accept, or whether we would rather not look at towers and have poor service. Those are our options.
I think the simple answer to this is that there's a tremendous lack of telecommunication coverage in the town of East Hampton. We are a town that was built in the colonial years, and most all the roads sometimes led to water. A lot of times when the road leads to water, it goes downhill through ravines. Okay? I know, I'm trying. So what I'm trying to say here right now is that with telecommunications, I think my end result is telecommunications will allow for greater growth development as far as job opportunities out here. So many of us now have cord cut our home telephone lines. What happens now, we mostly use our cell phones, not just for business, not just for pleasure, but many times for business. So we have to strengthen that infrastructure. Now, that infrastructure currently goes by erecting a very large telephone pole or a monopole. But we have to look at other ways, other forthcoming technologies. We have to look at the 5G systems. The Internet of Things is called the IoT. We have to look at small cell desensification. What these are small little radio wave boxes that will be able to allow us to get through our coverage spots or our spotty areas of coverage. These are things that we have to demand upon our government and also our telecommunication providers. I have a very large cell phone bill with 4 children at home right now. I think we all do too. We all pay a lot of money. They are making a lot of money at Verizon and AT&T, and we should deserve the best service possible out here that does not change the character of our wonderful community right now. I'll be honest to you. I think cell phone towers can look better than they do right now. They're not as big and bulky as they were in the past, but we need to have more of them in the appropriate spots if possible, but try to find alternative technologies. I think my end result on this would be job growth and job creation right now then too. But the most important thing is for safety. EMS safety, emergency medical services, and also safety if anyone ran off the road, or if I'm in the woods. I was a very big avid biker and trail user. If I ran off the road and I hurt myself and I had my cell phone, I can't drag myself out of the trails. So that's a factor that we have to look into as far as telecommunications also.
Just a couple of things. In terms of the emergency services, what we really need to do immediately is the engineering that we have not done yet to figure out how we can get the system that we already own installed on the towers that we already own, and if it can't be, how we're going to build new towers fast enough to alleviate this crisis. As far as the cell phone service goes, This is actually one of the simpler problems that we face. Things like coastal erosion, water quality, affordable housing, there are a lot of unknowns that have to be addressed to solve those problems. What kind of towers you have to have, how many, how far apart, whether they can see each other, is simply an engineering problem. So we have to ask ourselves, really, it's a matter of political will. What concretely do we need in terms of tower coverage, and are we, as a community, willing to build those towers? The answer may be yes, the answer might be no.
I think we also have to look at, don't forget, that character of that neighborhood then too. We have a lot of historical districts. You'll be surprised. Where is the tower actually in Wainscott? Where is there a cell phone tower in the hamlet of Wainscott? It is actually in Home Sweet Home. It is covered in there. There's actually a tower also in the East Hampton Presbyterian Church. So there's ways that we can make these towers work within our character of our neighborhood. But it really comes down to safety. Yes, it is an engineering feat. Right now, what happens with the emergency services communication towers, the town is about to go out to bid right now to move forward with that engineering. That's going to be happening on Thursday night. That system has to be up and running immediately. All the board members know that. There's actually board members at that meeting tonight. Myself, as a board member now, will continue the fight for that system to be up as soon as possible for the safety of the residents and the safety of my own family.
Okay. Our next question is D, which is reasonably priced housing. Since our town's record with large public projects is dismal for the last 10 or 20 years, should we be creating smaller building lots to spark construction of reasonably priced market rate housing for sale or rental? I guess it's you, David.
Sure,
Okay.
I have the mic.
I can't be wrong with David, and then you guys figure out who's supposed to speak.
We'll keep track.
Keep track. Keep me honest.
Reasonably priced housing, I think, will actually determine how much our town is able to control or expand our volunteerism base in the futures to come. I think that I know a lot about reasonably priced housing because I actually provide them to multiple tenants. My family and I have actually 4 reasonably priced, affordable priced housing units in the hamlet of Amagansett. We can actually charge a lot more money based on some of the standards than we do, but we decide not to. As I mentioned before, my dad immigrated from Indonesia. He came and left when a tyranny was going there, in a military dictatorship in the early 60s. One of the first things we came into when we located this property and we purchased it, my dad told me, I do not want to be a slumlord. And I looked back at my dad and I said, I do not want to be greedy. So we fixed up the property, we continued to rent them. We rented one to one of the gentlemen that ran the IT programs for the town. He lived in there for about 16 years. I still rent them to people that actually give back to the community. Sure, my mom and dad and my sister and I, we look at each other sometimes and say, let's get a little bit more money. I look back at them and say, good karma. We don't really need to. Let's not get greedy. We know what we need. I disagree, and I don't think that we need to actually make smaller size lots to solve this problem. I think fundamentally what we have to do right now is we have to look for locations within our town, and it might be actually spot areas instead of large tracts of land where we could actually decrease the deficit that we actually have for affordable housing units. There's multiple ways that the town has recently been doing that. We have affordable housing legislation that goes over top of current structures that have to be built in commercial districts. We can actually design and build affordable apartments on properties that fit the size constraints. That has been recently done. Unfortunately, not enough people have done that recently. If we subdivide land, we have to make sure that they put in a unit of affordable housing. But overall, I think what we have to recognize right now is that the most expensive part to affordable housing is not the actual construction phase. If you get lucky to build at $200 a square foot, you are probably under half of what the normal resident is going to get. You might be able to get land. Land is the most expensive part. At some point, we have to have the political will to buy land, either with municipal money or another act of legislation, to hold till we build these properties. I don't think that downsizing properties is good for any character in the neighborhood, but at the same time, We have to make sure we put a dent in the bucket.
Thank you. Directly to the question you asked, Arthur, allocating CPF money for this kind of a problem, to my mind, is putting the cart before the horse. Before you ask yourself, how are we going to pay for something, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, what is it we're going to do? And how much is it going to cost? In the comprehensive plan adopted now 15 years ago, our comprehensive plan, the town set a goal of 1,300 units of affordable housing to serve multiple purposes: for seniors, for young people starting out in life, for working families, and to some extent for seasonal workforce housing. At the rate we're currently going, now we have a couple of projects right now, 531 in Amagansett, the Accabonoc Manor project. That represents 50 units, and that's what we've achieved over 10 or 15 years. At that rate, it's going to take 200 to 300 years to reach the goal set in the comprehensive plan. Now, I've had one board member say to me, well, people talk about this, but they don't really want change. That might be. But until we've laid out in front of the community what we need to do to achieve this, I don't think we can answer the question whether the community is willing. I believe this is a generous community, and it will be. But what have we got to do? We've got to assess the need for all kinds of housing. We've got to figure out at what price we can buy housing or construct housing. We need to make the decision that for affordable housing to be affordable, it's going to have to be more dense. We can't have one house per acre and expect it to be affordable. But dense housing doesn't need to be ugly housing. There's a set of condominiums near where I live, over on Toilsome, that I drive by all the time, and it's beautiful. So we can build dense housing. We can certainly build it cheaper, even if it has to be subsidized. It doesn't have to be ugly, but we have to make the determination of our need. How is it going to affect the schools? How is it going to affect the tax base? How is it going to affect water quality? These are answerable questions if we get down to doing it and can explain to the community where, how. It's not one size fits all. We may have areas where we can build 5 units. We might have areas where we can build 50. We might have places where we can build 100. There's enough land in East Hampton to achieve this goal if we have the political will.
I think the design and the knowledge is for where we can put affordable housing is starting to happen within some of the Hamlet studies and the Hamlet plans. We have to look at where we can potentially put either overlay districts on for affordable housing overlay districts, or where we can appropriately locate this. One of the locations that actually I brought up at the charrettes that had been done, and actually I would be supporting, was actually to put an affordable housing overlay district right in this area here on the North Main Street area. Many of those units there, of the 25 units that make up Indian Hill and Miller Lane Terrace, are actually multi-density properties right now, probably a good third of them. So it makes it appropriate. What we can end up doing then is they can walk to town, and it actually ends up helping with our economy. So if we find areas that we can actually sparsely populate 5, as David was saying, maybe 2, we have to make the dent there. But there also might be larger overlay districts that we could put into certain areas in the town of East Hampton to actually allow for more affordable housing or multi-density housing too. But I think the Hamlet studies is starting to look at that, and we need to continue looking forward.
Affordable housing overlays have been in existence in East Hampton for a long time. And for whatever reason, essentially they've failed. The number of people who take advantage of these opportunities is minuscule compared to the need and the demand. So possibly that kind of program can be retailored in the future if we can figure out why it doesn't work. But if we're expecting affordable housing overlays to do the job for us, we already have evidence of 10 or 15 years. It's not happening. And that's what I mean when I say, we're just not getting these things done. Adding more affordable housing overlays doesn't hurt anything, but the evidence is it's also not going to make a big difference.
But we should try.
By all means.
That's yours.
Okay, try we will. Our next is question I, which is energy self-sufficiency. Since even Deepwater Wind's own projections show that it will not meet East Hampton's summer peak demand when the offshore winds are the lightest, how can the town build out its own local grid to make use of locally produced solar power independently from PSE&G. I think this is David Lease this time.
Nope,
Oh,
I think this
oh,
one's
okay.
mine.
I've lost track.
Well, I still go to school. I'm still studying in school right now for a degree in economics, a PhD. And one of the things that I was asked to do was present on the subject of renewable energy. And I discovered that there's a fascinating study done by a group of physicists who evaluated what's the gross amount of energy that we can get from all of the available sources, biomass, wind, water, nuclear, if we achieve the maximum conceivable amount of energy from every one of these sources. And their conclusion was that every other source other than solar will not meet more than 10% of world demand. So ultimately, the only possible answer, while we need to do all of these things, the only possible answer to the crisis of global warming and the need for renewable energy is solar power. It's the only source that has enough gross energy impinging on the Earth to be a viable source. We need to pursue this in East Hampton, and in fact, there is a plan, an excellent plan that was written going back to 2016 for exactly how we can build a local grid and what we need to do. Unfortunately, that plan has largely been put on the shelf, upstaged, I'm afraid, by Deepwater Wind. We need to get it off the shelf. It's a highly technical report, but beautifully done. And it tells us it's for 15 megawatts of local power. That's a pretty good chunk. It doesn't meet all of our needs, but that's just one particular study of where we can start. We need to take that report off the shelf, and we need to start looking at implementing it.
I think David and I agree here that we need to increase the amount of solar power and solar electricity that the town of East Hampton produces. I think we could also agree that fossil fuel dependency by America and by the town of East Hampton has to cut it and be done so that we can actually move forward right now with a better environment. We can agree to that.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough when I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals to actually approve some variances that they requested for the first ever solar field array in the town of East Hampton. Even more lucky, on my road on my way into work this morning, or actually it was 2 days ago, from Accabonac Road, I saw a brush hog and a chipper at the old Accabonac brush dump, where they're actually going to be putting that solar array there. So I'm happy to say that the town is actually moving forward on their first ever solar array, and hopefully should be functional within the next 6 to 7 months. It's going to be a drop in the bucket to what we need. I think what we need to also do right now is continue with looking at our town properties. NYSERDA and New York State Energy, we are actually looking at implementing solar panels on all our roofs of structures that actually can support them. We're looking from locations from hangars at the airport to the Marine Museum to the sanitation department to find out how many kilowatts we could actually get out of solar panels that would go on town-owned buildings. The town is also looking at peak saver, energy demands, and using HERS ratings then too. But that's what the town can do. I think what we also have to do is educate the individual taxpayers and residents to say every individual can step up and we can put an aggregate together to get us off of our fossil fuel demands right now then too. And how can we do that? We might have to go with low percentage loans on there. We might have to look for more grants. But I think it's constant education of these individuals that looking at solar panels is going to become the norm and not something that you look at with disgust. Another thing we have to say to each other right now is we're in this together. We want to move forward to energy dependency. Another way we have to look at energy dependency also is storm prevention right now. We need to look into having microgrids. We had Hurricane Sandy 6 years ago. I was without power with a pregnant wife for 9 days, I believe, then too. It's 9 days way too long. We have to look into battery power at individuals' homes, battery-powered operations at town facilities that could keep up critical infrastructure then too. Store the power for when it needs to be used. I was also fortunate enough to be on the Zoning Board of Appeals to approve the first ever battery energy storage facility in Montauk, and that was approved and it's actually under construction now. I will also agree to that I didn't think it was the best location for it, but that wasn't under consideration from the Zoning Board of Appeals at that time. It was mostly just the variances from the front yard that they were looking for. But still, I was fortunate enough to be involved in that. Solar power is going to be our future. We have to accept it, and we have to keep moving forward with it.
Well, I just wanted to repeat that we actually have a microgrid plan in East Hampton for 15 megawatts, and it's been sitting there since June of 2016, and we're not doing anything with it. We need to get going, and if we're going to make a start, that's the place to start.
Okay. Okay, our next topic, and I'm more careful now as to which David's which.
Okay.
This is going to be David Lease who starts this one, is airport noise. If the FAA will not allow the town to meaningfully reduce airport noise from helicopters and jets, should the town consider closing the airport in 2022?
The airport and airport noise has become a tremendous burden and dissatisfaction for many of the residents of the town of East Hampton and also surrounding communities. It is up to the town board to take this burdensome dereliction of operations and fly-by-night helicopters and seaplanes and their pilots and control it right now. We can't take any options off the table. That's how we lose leverage. The amount of operations that have happened commercially for individual companies trying to bring tourists out here has skyrocketed over the last 5 years. Now, granted, I know David lives a lot closer to the airport, and probably many of you than I do. I live in Bean Springs. But it hurts me to understand what your plight is. I have a very good friend. His daughter's the godfather of my daughter. His daughter's godfather of my daughter. He lives up on Ridge Road. And we go to dinners there, or have gone to dinners there in the past, and it's an assault. It truly is. And it's not fair. We have to get a handle on it. We have to do this either by completing the ANCA, going completely through the Part 161. We have to look for measurable noise reduction, either through legislative action right now, through our senators. We have to keep all the pressure on possible to make sure that the East Hampton Airport comes to within compliance. It is not a burden of the town of East Hampton's residents and other surrounding neighborhoods right now, too. I know Dave's going to have a lot to talk about this right now. One of my first things I did in February, when I took over the town, I was on the town board, appointed to the town board, is I went to the airport. I needed to get ahead of this. I knew what the emerging problems were going to be, or not even emerging, the problems were going to be, and I needed to be able to deal with and answer these. I took a total tour of there. I also went to the airport on Friday of Memorial Day and Friday of July 4th. And I got a little bit upset to all of them, all the individuals that work there. And the reason why is because we are harvesting data right now. And the data harvesters were not there one day. Or the next day they were there, they were working without a proper Wi-Fi or not in the proper location. I take airport noise, airport safety seriously, and I look forward to working to a result. But no, I don't think we should take closing the airport off the table.
Well, I'm sort of notorious for being an advocate for getting airport noise under control. In fact, I first came into public life in East Hampton in 1998 when Pat Trunzo, who's sitting here, and at the time was suing the town for an illegal expansion of the main runway, asked for help, and I was at that meeting, and I sort of raised my hand and said, well, I'll try. 7 years later, after 2 state lawsuits, 2 federal lawsuits, an action before the FAA, and a federal grand jury investigation, we succeeded in negotiating a settlement with the FAA that relieved the town of East Hampton from FAA control 7 years early, at 2014 instead of 2021. In 2014, for 15 months, I chaired a town committee, the Airport Planning Committee Noise Subcommittee, and we were drafting proposed restrictions for airport noise, restrictions on airport access to control noise, and giving the intellectual justification for them. Unfortunately, most of what we recommended to the town was ignored. We wanted to use a price system to control access to the airport and use, and the town refused to consider that. The ultimate outcome, I'm sorry to tell you, is essentially a disaster. The opportunity that Pat and I worked for 7, actually all things considered, closer to 15 years to achieve has been squandered by a town board that didn't know what it was doing and wouldn't listen. It simply wouldn't listen to the people who do know, who have considerable expertise, and we're pleading with them behind the scenes as to what to do. I know this because Pat and I still sit on the Airport Management Advisory Committee, and it has happened more than once. Now, that's a committee that's balanced. It's half people from the community who are concerned about airport noise, and half people with interest at the airport. 3 and 3. It's deadlocked on purpose to force us to come to agreement or not. Nobody can be outvoted. It's happened more than once that even when both sides agree unanimously, the town still will not do what we recommend. And I cannot fathom why. I know with certainty that the town board members do not know more about this subject than the people who own airport businesses, fixed-base operators, and operate aircraft, and the people who've studied the problem of noise for 20 years, and yet there's this is emblematic to me of the unwillingness to invite the essential participation of knowledgeable community members. I experienced this directly, and I know from talking to people who are involved with water, they have the same experience. If we do not invite knowledgeable members of our community to participate directly in the formulation of policy, we're going nowhere on these big issues, and that, unfortunately, is what has happened with the airport. The only other thing I'd add is that we can succeed at this. I believe we can. It's difficult, much more difficult than it was, if we pursue an aggressive legal strategy. We are not doing that. Again, knowledgeable people have gone behind the scenes to plead with the town to do this. So far, deaf ears.
With that optimistic note,
Highly.
those of us who are getting older would be interested in G, which is senior housing. And David, you're not that old, but why don't you talk about senior? Just to set this up, our senior population is expected to grow by about 30% every 5 years, and yet we don't know how to keep our loved ones here with no assisted living or other specialized facilities, even in the planning stage, forgetting the senior center renovation.
All right, well, Paul Fiandella, who is also, I know, here tonight because I saw him earlier, he came this morning to the town board meeting work session, and he talked movingly and in deep distress about an immediate neighbor of his who was forced to sell her home ultimately because she was the only way she could afford to live. And after she did so, ended up homeless in East Hampton because there is no housing in East Hampton for her. And she was, according to Paul, she was actually living in the woods. And he reported this, and she was taken to Riverhead. His point to the town board is that we have long neglected the needs of senior citizens who age in place and at some point, for reasons of health or finances, cannot stay in their homes. And we do not have anything for them. We have 127 units of senior citizen housing, subsidized housing, with a waiting list that was closed in 2010 because there was no longer any point in adding anybody to the list. It was so oversubscribed. This is part of the larger problem. We need to assess the need, and of course we understand that senior citizens do have specialized needs in terms of housing, particularly in terms of immediate access to medical care, and in terms of assistance of various kinds on the premises or nearby. But it's a mistake, I think, to consider senior housing in isolation from the other forms of housing that we need for families and young people. I know my grandmother, she liked nothing more than to have young people around. She didn't, and she was still helping at the Senior Citizen Center where she lived when she was in her 90s. She was a volunteer. But she loved to have young people around. She loved to hear the voices of children. It's a mistake for us to consider senior housing in isolation and to make senior ghettos. We should be doing this on an integrated basis where, in the context of the full range of affordable housing needs, that all of the facilities that we end up building include both housing for people starting out, housing for families with children, and housing for seniors. Again, we need to assess this need. We need to know what we need to accomplish. We need to map out what it's going to take. And then we need to decide to do it.
I do appreciate Paul coming this morning and speaking so passionately. It was terrible to hear about the situation of your neighbor, but it's nice to hear the knowledge and your intellect on the subject matter then too, Paul. So I do appreciate you coming. And I do listen, because it's a true demand that we need to really make sure that we take care of. I agree with David that I think the integration of ages in a facility is actually heartfelt and actually healthy for everyone then too. I do not necessarily agree that we haven't assessed the problem. We know that there's a problem. It was already mentioned in the question here that the aging population is going to be increasing by 30%. What we need to do right now is target the properties. We need to be able to say we're going to spend money now on the land and on the property and put it onto our burden right now, onto our capital projects. We just need to step forward and say that we're going to spend money to get this taken care of. The designs are going to be out there. We can design. We actually have great community input on some of the other projects going forward that we need to continuously keep listening to. But sooner or later, we just have to really put our foot down and govern right now and make the hard decision. Are we going to spend the money right now, or are we going to kick the can down the curb? I would rather spend the money, get this taken care of, and build multiple different layers for senior living. Now, with multiple different layers, it might be assisted living facilities. It could be standalone homes or locations. It also means that we have to increase our medical needs and our medical transparency and also open accessibility for our senior populations then too. My parents had to sell their house, okay? Yes, we do have another piece of property that we would like to build on, but they would love to sell their house and invest in a smaller house out here. Now, Putnam, the 555 project, while it was the exact wrong location, it was a good concept that we could have gone forward with right now as far as having a community-based location where we would have a potential clubhouse or walking paths for aging facility put in one location then too. I like being able to say that the greatest nest egg that individuals are going to have out here is going to be their home. Let's say we can average the house, sell it at $1 million. For some of the individuals that might be living in Springs, they might be able to buy into another condo or that at $400,000 to $500,000 in a facility like this. Maybe then they can put money into the bank to travel or to pay for the health care as the years go on. But it's something that needs to be addressed. I am looking actively to address that, and my other board members know that too.
Well, I would only add that most of the people here, I assume, are Democrats because it's a Democratic primary, although I know we've got a couple of Republicans in the room. Nonetheless, we as Democrats have to accept that we've been talking about this for many, many years, and we have not been getting the job done. We need to own that responsibility and accept that if we are not going to get the job done, we need to stop talking about this and tell our seniors, you better make some other plans, because when you can't live in your home, there is not going to be a place for you in East Hampton. Personally, I don't find that as acceptable as a Democrat and as a human being. But we've got to do one or the other. We cannot keep going forward year after year, making the same promises in our campaign platforms and not delivering. That's what I'm here for. That's why I'm doing this.
Okay. Next, we have B, the Community Preservation Fund. And this is a long sentence, maybe a little hard to follow, so if you read along with me, maybe you'll get the gist of it. Since an unintended consequence of the CPF acquisitions is the erosion of community by making the remaining land more expensive for working folks to build or rent a modest house in East Hampton, how, if at all, should the CPF be adjusted so that part of the $750 million coming into the CPF in the coming 30 years can be used to preserve the community?
The CPF funds over the next 30 years are actually more anticipated to be closer to $900 million now.
I'm a conservative guy,
No problem.
despite this code.
I can't blame the use of CPF funds for the supply and demand that we have on affordable building lots or affordable housing lots in the town of East Hampton right now. I think the CPF funds and the way that we have used it for water quality and open space has led to a greater quality of life in the town of East Hampton. Yes, it has taken properties off our tax rolls, but it still has increased the environmental purities that we look for and value in the town of East Hampton right now. A lot of the CPF properties that we purchase right now are purchased in areas that have a type of natural resource jurisdiction over it. They're either close to a shoreline, close to a wetland, and some of those properties are actually of a higher price than would become affordable if you wanted to build on it. I think we can use the CPF more intellectually. We can use the CPF in a way that it would actually help produce a quality of living standard out here that can actually be desired. Do we have to tweak it potentially? Do we have to legislate it to see? Let's just be honest. We're actually running out of large tracts of land. Large tracts of land are not in the town of East Hampton too much. So do we end up trying to, and we're going to be getting to a point where the amount of properties coming into evaluation for CPF and to the CPF advisory board is going to start getting less and less. And what I think we might need to do is see, do we want to legislate to see if the CPF wants to tweak that idea that it can be used for affordable housing, for senior living? Potentially. I would be up for listening to that, but that's outside my privy right now then too. I don't think the CPF is the root cause. I don't think it's necessarily helped as far as the supply of affordable lots. I think it's the overdevelopment of the East End right now. We live in a very desirable area out here that individuals like to come to. Look at Springs right now. The real estate market under $1 million in Springs is on fire. Individuals are deciding not to rent summertime houses for $60,000 to $80,000 anymore, and that is actually a cheap rate because they would rather pay the mortgage at $60,000 to $80,000 and live out here year round. What does that end up doing? That ends up taking away from the starting homes. The starter homes in Springs at $600,000, you give me a $600,000 house, that would be snapped up in minutes. An $800,000 house is a starter house right now. But when that house is being purchased as a second home, you're not allowing for a family to live here, to give back to the community, to join the school systems, and to volunteer. And that's how we continuously keep losing our fabric of our community. Too many of my friends are leaving or have left. Don't get me wrong, they all would love to stay here and all love to come back. But it's extremely difficult to afford it and to find the value of the property that allows for it. But I do not think that the CPF has ruined, is the root cause for the unaffordability. And necessarily hasn't helped, but I don't think it's the root cause.
Well, I would have to say it no longer really matters. I'm sure that to some extent, using the CPF to reduce the supply of land has raised land prices. That's just how things work. If the supply goes down, the price goes up. But it's not really important to figure out at this point why our land values are so high. They're high. And that's why housing is unaffordable for people who make their living, or many people who make their living in East Hampton. On the other hand, we are a wealthy community overall, and money is not the problem either. The problem is we actually have to build it. I'm confident that one way or another, we can finance what we want to build, whether it's with CPF money or a variety of other means. It's the cart before the horse to say that the problem is finding the money. No, the problem, and here's where I'm a broken record again, is we have to figure out the outcome that we want. What kind of housing do we want? How much of it do we want? Where can we put it? How are we going to build it? If we can solve those problems and come up with a viable plan, I'm absolutely certain that one way or another, we can finance it.
I think David had already mentioned earlier.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is the political hot potato called reassessment. And by the way, the only person who was ever in favor of this was Fred Overton, a Republican, who was the tax assessor and realized how crazy the system is. According to a preliminary study, the larger houses in East Hampton, as a group, are underassessed by over 30%, with the result, unintended, that the more modest homeowners as a group are paying more than their fair share of real estate taxes. Now that East Hampton has ample cash reserves to pay for a tax reassessment required by state law, can our town board keep ducking the issue of reassessment? David Gruber?
Sure.
I think it's myself, isn't it?
Oh, if you guys want,
I think it's his turn, but I'm willing.
Okay.
Up to you.
Paper, scissors?
I'm more than happy to David Lee's go
Sure.
first.
I think our form of assessing properties in the town of East Hampton is archaic. It's outdated, but we have to be very careful as we potentially move forward in that direction. I think it's common knowledge that 1/3 of properties will increase their tax base, 1/3 of the properties will decrease, and the other third of properties will stay the same. It's been estimated it's going to cost about $5 million to go through that reassessment. That's a lot of money. And next, what I think we then have to do is decide on where we want to prioritize spending that money. Here is my fear. My fear is the residents that have lived in some of the areas of the town of East Hampton for 4, 5 generations in the same exact house, that the assessment of their property is only a couple $1,000s. These individuals are living there and are over 60, 65, 70, or 80 years of age right now. And we decide to reassess, and by chance, because they live in a lovely place that was in their family for many generations, or they bought at a very low price, now that their assessed value of their home is going to go up so dramatically that it's going to become more affordable for them to live in the town of East Hampton. That's what I'm fearful when we start talking about reassessment, and it's a true fact. If we do decide to go on reassessment, I think we have to make sure that we look at doing this on a test basis. We would have to do our homework before we do a rollout and implementation that actually can ruin some individuals' lives. I think we have to have some tests in there to see if the circuit breaker is going to flip on us and actually is not going to work. Lastly, I'll say this. When we talk about affordable housing and some of the needs for our senior living, I would be more inclined right now to spend the money on more affordable housing and senior living facilities than necessarily assessing right now. Reassessing.
I don't think that the cost of reassessment has ever been the obstacle. I think that's the excuse that's been given, because this is a political hot potato. And it's a political hot potato because there are people in town who are rightly fearful that if property is reassessed, their individual tax bills may go up significantly. I think to a large extent that fear is overblown, because we have properties in East Hampton. I mean, how many towns in the United States have houses worth $100 million? We have properties in East Hampton that are worth fortunes, that are not just underassessed by 30%, they're probably underassessed by 90%. I think it's more likely in this town that the classic claim is you reassess, 1/3 goes up, 1/3 goes down in terms of the tax bill, and 1/3 stays the same. I think it's far more likely in East Hampton that 1/3 will go up and 2/3 will probably go down. But I agree with David that, as Jeff Bragman says on most subjects, you got to know before you go. So we have to do some kind of a pilot study to ascertain, well, how big a problem might we have of people who find that their taxes are unaffordable? And we've got to have a solution for that problem before we proceed to reassessment. That might be an area where use of CPF money to alleviate the problem for people whose income is insufficient to carry the tax burden, that would be something I'd want to look at seriously. But the main thing is, it's long overdue, and it's an accident waiting to happen, because we're so far outside the rules of when property has to be reassessed that the moment that somebody brings a lawsuit, we're going to be reassessing. So the question isn't, should we? The question is, do we want to do it under control, where we can address the potential problems in an orderly way, or do we want to just keep waiting until somebody forces this upon us and we've got to go willy-nilly with unknown consequences? I think this is mine.
Okay.
Sorry.
One thing we know is happening is the oceans are rising, and with increasing shoreline erosion and meaningful funding from the federal government unlikely, how can the town protect Montauk beaches and other low-lying areas? David?
Well, we have to distinguish between two related but different phenomena. On the one hand, we have the rising sea level, which over time is going to take land away from us. That's going to happen. I mean, the ocean's pretty big. And if it takes land because it rises 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, whatever it is over the course of the next century, that land is going to be underwater, and there really isn't anything I can imagine doing about it. I mean, there are places in the world, such as the Netherlands, that are below sea level, but I just can't conceive that on this narrow strip of land, we could build the kind of dikes and water management systems that Holland depends on to keep itself from flooding. So on the one hand, we have to recognize that slowly over time, beyond my lifetime, not a lot of land, but some of the land on our coast is going to disappear. That's just a fact. The related phenomenon are storms. As the sea level rises, as we have more heat in the atmosphere, we know that storms, violent storms, are becoming more frequent, and the combination of the added energy of those storms and the higher level of the seas creates storm surges that we haven't seen before, except maybe in the 30s, the 38. That's a related but different phenomenon. I don't see that we can provide for the slow increase of the level of the seas, but that does happen slowly. On the other hand, we can, and I think we have to think about protecting key areas of East Hampton from storm surges. Now, we did some of this. Notoriously, we did this in 2015, 3 years ago, by putting these large geobags, the huge sandbags on the beach in Montauk. Contrary to what some people think, that's actually permitted by the local waterfront revitalization plan. It specifically says that in an emergency, you can use geobags filled with sand. But it also says you must have a plan in place for removing them. Well, we don't. Our plan was the Army Corps of Engineers is going to rescue us. They're going to ride in and they're going to give us so much sand that we'll be able to get rid of them. It's 3 years later, and the critics who said they're not coming have turned out to be pretty much correct. Therefore, we have to plan. We either have to say, well, we're just going to leave them there forever, or we have to consider what has to happen in downtown Montauk so that we can get rid of those sandbags. There's some progress on that. We have a Coastal Assessment Resiliency Plan, CARP, where a group has been considering with professional assistance what to do. It's another consulting plan. You read this thing, too hard to figure out what concretely we need to do. I'm not much for symbolism. I don't care for it. I like to do pragmatic, concrete things, which means somebody has to answer the question, how many properties on the shore in Montauk are at risk? What would it take to move them? Is there a place for them to go? And what it's going to cost? What would it cost to do that? Sometimes, as I said, the answer is to do nothing. It might be the case that just waiting for the sea to take them is actually the cheapest, best solution. But if we don't ask that question in a thoughtful way, what does it take? What's the outcome we want? What does it cost to get there? What are the available means to accomplish that? We're never going to get those sandbags off the beach.
In the last 5 years, there have been multiple studies done. These studies have actually looked at future forecasts. Some of them have been led by the town through CARP. I've attended many of those meetings. And we also look at our outdated LWRP plan, which I will, as the liaison to the Waterfront Advisory Committee, will look forward to looking for grant money for an update in the future upcoming years and make that a priority. LWRP shows different reaches in the town of East Hampton. Now, the downtown Montauk area is an economic driver for the town of East Hampton for the motel areas, and is actually not necessarily where the town of the hamlet of Montauk originally was built. We need to make sure that we look at sea level rise, not that it's going to happen, but it's an inevitable. If you go to many of these CARP meetings, we all are understanding that sea level rise is not going to affect the oceans, it's going to affect the back bays. Sea level rise is going to come and flood through areas like Lazy Point and like Girard Drive. It is going to be the storms, as David is correctly speaking right now, the intensity of the storms, the magnitude of the hurricanes, that is going to overcome the dune systems on our oceanfront areas right now. We are in a special area, 71 miles of shoreline in the town of East Hampton, and it's all under threat constantly. The greatest erosion rate in the town of East Hampton is located on the north side of Napeague on Cranberry Hole Road at about 1.3 feet a year. Those areas have to make sure that we hold building standards right now to hold your first floor elevation at a certain level that's going to be, make sure that the building will not create a safety burden if it washes away to other houses and is strong enough to stay. David is correct. Sometimes they might just have to stay to be washed away. You can see one of those off of Mulford Farm Lane that's still up on stilts right now. We also have to look at adaptability. A lot of individuals would like to say and call it retreat. I think we have to look at it as adapting to sea level rise right now. We have to transfer, potentially come up with a plan to transfer development rights of some of the commercial businesses that are economic drivers off of the primary dune in the downtown Montauk and bring them back. But I can't give up on the thought that FIMP will come through. Granted, I remember going to the meeting with FIMP, and Mr. Cantwell at the time said, FIMP has been going on since I was born, and he is true. That's why you have to put constant pressure on it. But we can't just look for the outside governmental agencies to come in and like a knight in shining armor. We have to do something locally. And recently, we just commissioned the Montauk Beach Preservation Committee to look at potentially doing an erosion control district for downtown Montauk. That would help supersede the sandbags that keep constant sand on the beaches there in Montauk for protection of the primary dune, of the homes, also of the resort areas, and the economic driver that is our hamlet. Lastly, we have to continue these studies. CARP is not complete. So whatever David was reading is not a complete study because it's stalled a little bit for multiple different reasons on there right now. We have to go analyze where we're vulnerable. We have to protect it and have the knowledge of using the CPF in this instance in the correct manners. Try to make sure we purchase properties either on the ocean or also on the back bays that could be in vulnerable flood zones.
I can't quite help myself. I have to read to you from the vision statement of CARP. It says, based on lessons learned from prior short and long-term coastal processes, a more sustainable approach to managing storm effects and climate change conditions is needed to reduce damages, maintain communities, and protect natural resources. The vision of CARP is to integrate coastal resiliency principles and facilitate the town's ability to adapt to changing conditions within the coastal zone. The town desires to reduce the exposure of vulnerable assets and facilitate a quicker response to and recovery from extreme weather and climate events. CARP shall guide decision makers in resiliency planning, provide solutions for the town to adapt to flood and erosion risks, storm vulnerability, and improve the expected degree of natural recovery. What I want to know is, how many properties on the shore in Montauk are at risk? What is it going to take to move them? Where are we going to put them? Over what time period? And what is it going to cost? I don't need this to answer that question. But that question really does have to get answered if we're going to address this problem.
That question has been answered by FEMA. FEMA's actually come up with brand new flood zone maps. And if you're in a flood zone, you can contact FEMA or even contact our Natural Resources Department. They can tell you exactly what flood zone you're in for a 100-year storm. So that information is out there and is going into our Hamlet studies right now. It's going to go into our CARP formulation. And also within our priority projects and our LWRP, we are looking to come up with initiatives to make sure that we don't have to rely on the county for the county's plan when we respond to natural disasters. We wanted to plan for natural disasters built and designed for the town of East Hampton. So that is one of the priority plans and actions that the Waterfront Advisory Committee is about to undertake.
Okay. The other side of water coming in is
I think it's yours, sir. Okay.
is keeping clean water clean, and that's our next to last question. Since clean water drives the East Hampton economy, how can we get back large amounts of clean water in East Hampton in less than 25 to 30 years? What are the range of the issues, costs, financing, and solutions?
Well, not being a hydrologist myself, I can't answer the question how long it's going to take to get back clean water in East Hampton. What I do know is that we have a study, an enormous document, the Lombardi study, that was delivered to the town in pieces in 2015. It went so far in detail as to identify the numbers of houses that had insufficient or subpar septic systems, and the number of houses that had this, that, and the other thing that were in areas that were too low-lying, an enormous degree of detail. And like so many of the plans that we do, it's sitting there, and now we're doing it again. Now, because of the lure of CPF money, where it can be allocated to projects, we've got another study that's trying to consider how we should prioritize the spending of the CPF money. Yet again, the cart is before the horse. What we don't know, so that it seems on the face of it to make sense. Let's figure out what the worst spots in East Hampton are and spend the money to try to clean up those spots. First of all, by the time you're cleaning up, it's too late. The cleanup may be necessary, but if we're going to have clean water, we have to stop the junk from getting in the water in the first place. Prevention of contamination is what we need. Remediation when we have no choice. If we're going to try to poison our water and then fix it, we're never going to get there. There is a concept that's mentioned in the Lombardi study called total maximum daily load. It says, what's the maximum amount of each kind of contaminant that the system, the natural system, can tolerate? Unfortunately, when you get to that column in the study, there were a lot of blanks. That's what we need to know. We need to know how much stuff we're loading into the system every day, what the system can tolerate, and then we have to ask the question, what physically, concretely, as an engineering matter, can be done to close the gap between the stuff that we're putting in and the stuff the system can tolerate? That's a complicated question when you're talking about hydrology and water, in part because we can't see it. It's flowing under our feet. But again and again and again, the problem and the means by which we solve the problem are the same. We have to ask, what's the outcome that we need? What concretely must we do to be sure that there is not excess nitrogen going into our water supply, that we are not contaminating Wainscott not only with PFCs as we were, but with chromium, because we have elevated chromium there. We don't know what other contaminants we have across town because we've never tested. We got to know. There is nothing, there is no excuse, and there is no substitute for knowing before you're going.
Clean water, clean drinking water is not just a desire, it's not just the driver of our economy, but is a fundamental right for all the residents of the town of East Hampton to have. I'm a 20-year cancer survivor. I grew up over here in Newtown Lane, went to the high school, and witnessed and participated, unfortunately, in a cancer cluster. There were over 16 of us at that time that were diagnosed with cancer. Did it come from asbestos or did it come from water? I'm not going to point fingers, but I'm going to be a person here that's going to help fix it. Emerging chemicals, they could have been coming in for 50, 75 years. We don't exactly know. We're going to keep figuring this out and making sure we react appropriately. But I think what we have to look at this right now is on a multi-layer approach. We all know about the Wainscott water contamination. The town board has worked aggressively to take short-term and long-term matters in our hands right now to fix that problem for the hamlet of Wainscott. It is one of the largest municipal projects in the last 10 years that Suffolk County Water Authority has undertaken, and also the town of East Hampton. We also have to look at our septic systems. We are now making sure we have to use advanced technology septic systems to get our nitrogen load down to levels that get us close to almost gray water and drinking water as possible. We do this now through any type of building permit or new house. We also can do this through our Water Quality Technical Advisory Committee, which has other manufacturers of new septic systems present so that they can recommend these new systems to our new home builders and developers. This is all stuff that our other Democratic boards have initiated over the last 5 to 7 years right now, and we're working on it. What we also have to look at right now is education. A lot of the nitrate load that we're talking about, because CCOM, the Concerned Citizens of Montauk, are taking weekly water testing right now in all different areas, are not necessarily just coming from septic load or flow rate as called. They're coming from nitrate loads from your yards. The nitrate load from your yard right now that is seeping into the headwater is contaminating probably Georgia Pond more than the nitrate load from septic systems. We have to pay the price, and we are paying the price of a green lawn right now. So one of those multiple layers is the education of the homeowners that they can have a beautiful garden. I love gardening. They can have a beautiful garden without using nitrogen-loaded fertilizers. Also, the education of the landscapers, either through demanding that they have to be certified in the town of East Hampton or educated through continuing education courses, that there are other options out there instead of just putting more nitrogen on your lawn. Next, we have to look at road runoff. I believe road runoff right now is one of the largest contaminations of our headwaters that we have. Our MS4 plan does not actually include 3 Mile Harbor. And that is a travesty, knowing that it's one of the largest areas for shellfish and shellfish hatchery in the town of East Hampton right now. The largest, the most bacteria anywhere located in the town of East Hampton right now is coming from Hook Pond and from the Duck Pond. If you want to see what those numbers are, please contact CCOM. It is disgusting. It's a downward gradient from the village. It's a downward gradient from all the areas to the natural waterways over to Hook Pond, and that would be the Duck Pond. We have to take clean drinking water and make it even more of a priority than it is right now. It's going to take a multifaceted approach to it. Yes, we have CPF. We have 20%. This year is about $5.4 million that we can spend to it. And if we don't use it, it rolls back over into the general CPF fund. But we have to educate the public right now that we need to do it in multi-layers as far as road runoff, as far as septic load, as far as also nitrogen in our fertilizers. Another one is we are also looking in the town of East Hampton right now is looking at a managed a large-scale project potentially in the town of in the hamlet of Montauk right now to have a community wastewater plant. We can do either, they're called Appendix A or Appendix B plants for community plants in your neighborhood or low-lying waterways. But this one will also take a lot of the flow rate out of the hamlet in Montauk, the downtown Montauk areas, either ditch plains, either commercial districts, or down by the docks, and put it to an area that has been located by Mr. Lombardo and others right now, and get it to a point where we can actually take the gray water out of there and water our lawns. So we have to take a very active approach to it. I believe the town is doing that, but it's going to take a community to come forth and say, we are going to have to make some sacrifices for clean drinking water.
I want to thank both Davids. Unless, David, you want to add something now, or could it?
Well, I simply want to point out that we've been doing this for a while in the town. It isn't working. We have toxic algae blooms again in Georgia Pond due to excess nitrogen. All the things that are being described by David are things that have been on the table for a long time. It's not working. If we continue to do and fail to do the same things, we're going to get the same result. So we have to think about doing some things differently. Steve Israel, former Democratic congressman, an expert on the subject, says we probably need denitrification systems in every home that has a cesspool on Long Island, not just in East Hampton. I don't know. I suspect he's probably right. If that's in fact what we need, we better get on about doing it, not in 10 years after we've educated people about using fertilizer on their lawns, but now. And we may need CPF money to pay for that, not for particular glamour projects, but in order to be sure that everybody in town can afford to have clean water.
Well, now to be sure both people can wrap up, I guess David Lease, you go first in the 2-minute wrap up, and then David Gruber. This time
Well, I
got
just
it
want
right.
to finish on water quality because I think it's so important to us right now. And I'm not saying that we have to educate people for 10 years. We have to educate individuals now, for action now, and for next summer then too. We are looking at getting updated septic systems in everyone's houses as soon as possible, but people are fearful of that change and the costs and the process to go through. So we do have to educate it. We did not change the CPF law through a referendum overnight. This is being discussed for years to get to a point where sometimes government rolls too slowly, but we are moving forward, and I think the previous boards have been working to this point. I look forward to continuing that work.
Okay. Now, do you want to have a formal wrap up just to tell everybody about yourself and why they should vote for you, and then we'll call it a night?
I think it's your turn because I
Sure.
went first.
You go first, David. Lease.
My name is David Lease. I'm your current Democratic town councilman looking to retain my seat in this upcoming election. I am doing this not for political gain. I am not doing this for taking time away from my family. I am doing this for the residents of the town of East Hampton, for my daughters, for the generations that come in front of us right now. We all have a priority here to make sure that we keep East Hampton as unique as it is now as it was in 1648. There's so many generations that come before us that have worked hard through government, through volunteerism, to make sure that we want to come out here and sustain our quality of life. I have worked hard over the last 8 months. It's only been 8 months, and I have initiated numerous legislative victories right now. I have fought the utilities on the double wood utility legislation for their removal. I have increased safety standards and public access out of ditch plains parking lots. I have also increased the municipal parking lot timing standards and increased commerce in the Amagansett parking lots. I've gotten this all done in a very small amount of time. I ask of you, the voters in the town of East Hampton, to vote for me in the Democratic primary on September 13th and in November 6th to give me a chance to complete Peter Van Scoy's term for the next year. I look forward to seeing you also the following.
I've been at this for 20 years as among the most involved Democrats in the town of East Hampton. If we have a Democratic majority on the board today, I think it's honest and fair to say that nobody in East Hampton has worked harder or committed more to achieve that than I have. It's not a question of democratic values. The values expressed in the Democratic platform are my values because I've been writing the Democratic platform. I've recognized with some regret and sadness that we're not getting there. We are not doing the job that we Democrats have promised the town for years on end we're going to do. I feel responsible for that. I feel an obligation. I feel that it's in part my duty to step up and do what I can to redeem the promises that we Democrats and I have been making to you and the rest of this community for as long as I've been around in political life, and that is 20 years. That's why I'm here. That's what I intend to achieve. I think that I have the background, the skills, the education to help this board, a board that looks to me to be floundering in the face of serious issues, to achieve what all of us as Democrats and as members of the East Hampton community want. I don't think any of us loves East Hampton more or less than the other, but we need to get the job done. And it's for that reason that I ask you to give me your support and your vote in the primary for the Democratic nomination on the 13th, and then in the general election on November 6th. Thank you. I guess we're done.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming and to make me understand that there are really people in town on
Good job.
Tumbleweed Tuesday, and that you're all taking an interest in this. And thank you for your attention and your cooperation.